Good evening, everybody. Jonathan here, and I hope you all are having a really nice week. We are doing our normal Wednesday evening live stream, and tonight I have a very special guest, Bryan Konoski. Bryan is an appellate lawyer, meaning that he deals with cases mostly at the district court level after an ALJ has denied your case. Attorneys like me refer to people like Bryan to get assistance with appealing. And the nice thing about appellate work is you sort of see laws being made and the way this practice kind of changes. So I'm going to be asking him some questions about the appellate practice, the appellate side, and then we're going to take your questions, as always, about your cases and so forth. But I wanted you to get an idea of what it's like to sort of see things beyond the hearing stage. Because again, I'm in the trenches. Bryan is dealing with cases in federal court, very, very different. So first of all, Bryan, welcome. Thank you very much for coming to join us.
No, thank you very much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Yep, absolutely. And we do work together. In fact, you just took one of my cases today, as a matter of fact, which I very much appreciate. And I guess for those who are not really aware of what appellate practice is, and we're dealing with the appeals council to some degree, but federal district court, but just tell my audience, if you could, kind of what you do, what appellate practice is all about, and how that differs from what somebody like me would do at the hearing stage.
Yeah, it's actually really different. It's not the same at all. At your stage, you're in the trenches. You're advocating for your claimant to try to get your claimant the benefits that they deserve, and you're fighting for them on a daily basis, and you're doing the best you can. And what happens at the federal level is, in the unfortunate event where a claimant is denied benefits and they should have been approved, or they denied benefits and there's legal error. So you're dealing with facts. You're dealing with showing the judge, the ALJ, that your client is disabled based on the facts and evidence. At my stage, it's a little bit different. If a client is denied, it comes to me and I have to make a determination whether I'm going to accept a case and advocate before the federal court, not that the claimant is disabled, although that comes into play sometimes, but not that the claimant is disabled, but that the judge messed up, made a mistake, and we're arguing that the judge made an error. So in a sense, you're fighting for the client, and at the federal level, I'm sort of like the police officer who looks for the judge who made the mistake, and then I try to get them, to show the federal court that the judge made a mistake, right? So I'm there to argue judges made mistakes. I file lawsuits claiming judges messed up, and in order to do that, I have to take a look at the case to see if the judge followed the rules, regulations, and laws. So I'm not always looking to see if the claimant's disabled. I'm looking to see if the rules were followed. If you didn't follow the rules, then I take the case, I file a lawsuit, and sue, arguing that the judge made a mistake. That's basically the difference there.
All right. And give me a sense of the type of mistakes that judges make, because people get very, very upset when a judge turns their case down. What are the common things that judges are doing? And one of the things we talk a lot about on this live stream is that the judges, there's our decision writer writing the decisions. The judge is not actually writing it. So it's a third party writing it. And there can be some things lost in translation, I'm guessing. But what are the typical, if you had to pick 3 or 4 of the most common mistakes that judges make, what would those be?
Sure. And there are a lot of different ways judges make mistakes. And sometimes it seems like they go out of their way to make mistakes in cases. But yeah, there are a few that come up a lot. So for instance, and again, we're getting kind of technical here. And so, for instance, if a judge is evaluating a medical opinion, they have to evaluate what's called supportability and consistency, meaning what did the expert review to support their opinion, and what did the expert, and whether that opinion is consistent with other records. So you're getting into some nuances. It's very legal based, it's rule based, but that's one. Another type of issue, let's say if somebody has mental limitations, but they're not extremely severe, they've got some depression, maybe some anxiety, and it results in what the judge finds to be mild limitations. Let's say mild limitations in concentration or persistence, mild limitations in the ability to interact with other people in the workplace. And then the judge just ignores it. just pretends it's not even there. There's no issue whatsoever. We can argue, well, yes, okay, there's mild limitations, but that doesn't mean no limitations. You don't get to ignore it. You have to address it. You have to tackle that head on. And even mild limitations can impact whether somebody's disabled or not. So let's say, for instance, just again as hypotheticals, the person has a job that's semi-skilled or skilled, or sometimes even unskilled, but let's just say semi-skilled and skilled here. What kind of job could be? Well, I've handled one for an attorney, for instance. I've handled one for an accountant, where so you argue mild mental limitations can impact whether an attorney can do their job, whether an accountant can do their job. You can't ignore it. You can't say, oh, this means nothing. It means something. You know, a lawyer or a doctor, an accountant, and there's other types of skilled and semi-skilled work that's not, that skilled. And even that impacts. There's case law that says mild limitations can be especially critical for skilled and semi-skilled work. And if you're not going to account for it, that's an error. And judges love to ignore it. They love to pretend it's not there. They don't even explain why they're not even considering it. It's just in the wind. So those are two. And then there's a lot of others. Headaches, for one. People have very severe migraine headaches and cluster headaches that are debilitating. And judges will not evaluate properly whether the headaches meet or equal a listing. So listings are there's listings which are rules. If you meet those rules or the elements of those rules, which are called listings, you automatically get this disability. And sometimes judges will find that the headache condition is severe, but then not perform a proper listing analysis. So now you're looking at it, well, if you did a proper listing analysis, maybe this client would have been automatically granted disability. So again, like I'm saying that these are very technical nuances. As you can see, I'm not looking to see if the person's necessarily disabled, or the facts may come into play, but did the judge evaluate these rules properly? And they make mistakes, and that's where we come in to try to argue that some of those mistakes shouldn't have been made, and that the client should have a second bite of the apple. And then it goes back to you, so that you can once again get back to the grind and fight again and prove and make that effort to prove that that the claimant is disabled. So
what are there situations where the error, we'd call harmless error, where the judge made a mistake, but it doesn't really change the decision, how it would be made? Does that come into play?
Yeah, it does. It sometimes does. So there are times where a judge can make a mistake. They make a mistake. They don't follow the law. And there's an error, but the error is what's called harmless, meaning that even though the ALJ made a mistake of law, it would not have changed the outcome of the case anyway. And so that sometimes comes into play. Like, for instance, some jurisdictions find that the mere failure to follow a listing, to evaluate a listing, standing alone is remandable error. It could be reversed. Some jurisdictions take the position that even if the judge doesn't properly evaluate the listing, you still have to prove harm, that the listing would have been satisfied. So I can, in those jurisdictions, which can be difficult, if I argued the listing wasn't properly analyzed, it's an error. But if I still then can't prove that listing could have been satisfied, meaning there's nothing in the records about the headaches to begin with, just a couple of minor entries saying client said they had a headache today, I can't prove the listing satisfied, then I still lose, even though the judge didn't do their job properly.
Okay.
But
right. Let me jump into it, because this is an interesting question, because this is one of the things I had on my list to ask you about. RD tells me, I had my ALJ hearing this week, and the judge spoke with the attorney, advised that she'd approve my claim if we would change the onset date, the 55th birthday. RD lost 13 months of benefits, and there's the 5-month waiting period and so forth. Are you seeing a lot of this? And let's see, there's more. Okay. And I guess the question is, are you seeing a lot of situations where disability judges are changing the onset date and obviously cutting out a lot of past due benefits? And in your opinion, when does it make sense to appeal that? And when does it make sense to sort of say, I'm going to take my victory and just move on? Is there any kind of rule of thumb that you have?
Yeah. So when I do evaluate that at the federal level, and So first, I think sometimes whether you pursue an appeal or not is a judgment call that the claimant has to make with their attorney at the hearing level. That's a strategic decision to even have it evaluated. But sometimes it'll get to me, and I'll evaluate and I'll say, you know what, I have an error here. I found an error that I can work with. I might be able to get a remand. But the problem that you've got is that when it gets back on a remand, the judge gets to evaluate the entirety of the case all over again and could deny you completely. And that becomes a very big risk sometimes. Now, not every case is like that. Some cases you can tell that's never going to be an issue. You're fighting for your back pay. Might as well roll the dice and give it a shot. But I'm going to give one example. So, for instance, I was reviewing this one case where the claimant was found disabled at age 55. I think the client was 54 and like 8 months old. So the ALJ found the claimant was disabled as of the age 55 and found that because of what's called borderline age, right? So the judge considered that this person was borderline age, meaning they were just shy of 55 years old. So they applied the grid rules for the age 55 and above and found the claimant disabled. Now, I found other legal issues. I could have litigated this case. I probably could have gotten a remand. It was a strong case for appeal. But I told the attorney, I don't think this is a good idea because, for instance, the borderline age rules are very discretionary. They're not, if the judge makes a mistake on it, you're probably not going to win on it at federal level most of the time. Very, very discretionary. So if you send it back and the judge says, you know what, you wanted to appeal this, and now I find I made a mistake. I didn't think that, the borderline age doesn't apply. And now I don't think that you should get your benefits. And then all of a sudden you lost the entire case. Not worth it. So
Right.
sometimes you got to be careful.
Yeah, no, I think absolutely. I mean, my feeling is if you're looking at, losing, say, $10,000 or less, it really probably doesn't make a lot of sense to roll the
Right.
dice. If it's 30 or 40,000, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Any sense of if a case is remanded back to a judge, a federal court, and this, I assume the federal court only takes cases they want to take. They don't have to take every single case, right? This is discretionary on their part, or are they obligated to take every case that they see?
Who do you mean? The federal
No,
judges?
if let's say a case is appealed, you go to the appeals council, you lose, you take it to federal, or you take it to federal court. Does the federal court have to even consider it? I mean, could they just say, we're not going to do anything and just let it all stand? I mean, they're not, I assume that they only take cases that they want to take, like a certiorari type of thing?
No, we have if we take the case to federal court, the court has to hear it.
Okay.
Where the issue comes in, though, is whether the federal attorney wants to take it, right? Because with the federal attorneys, you have to understand that federal attorneys are taking cases on contingency fee basis. And every attorney has a different standard on what they look for in a case. We're very liberal on what we take. So we have a very high acceptance rate on the cases that we're accepting. But other attorneys, not so much. So some attorneys will reject a lot of cases because the reason for that is federal cases require a lot of time. You're talking, I would say a timesheet that we deal with on a federal level case is easily 30, 40 hours on average. And sometimes more, 50, 56 hours, you're putting 56 hours of time into a case. You want at least a reasonable chance of winning. So you're not going to take every case. So in a sense, the gatekeepers to get to federal court, in a sense, are the federal attorneys because they have to make a judgment call. Is this case really make sense? So do we really want to waste the federal judge's time on a case where you think that the odds of winning are like almost none?
And you get paid, and I know that you get paid a percentage, but there's no cap on it. Like with me, there's a $9,200 cap on the 25%. I'm assuming with you, at your level, there's no cap. And you have these, what is it, the 406B fees? How does that work?
So there's two types of fees at the federal level. If we win a remand on a case, which is most of the time it's a remand, meaning it goes back for a new hearing. We get what's called a fee under most of the time, a fee under the Equal Access to Justice Act. So that's one fee. That doesn't come out of the client's money at all. And the second type of fee is called a 406B fee. That relates to the statute number that talks about the fees. And that allows a federal attorney to get 25% of the back pay in addition to any fees that are paid to the administrative attorney. However, at our practice, we actually structure it a little differently than that. Even though we could pursue a full 25% and you can pursue your fee, we generally try and use our discretion to structure it so it just breaks down to the 25%, so the client doesn't have to pay more out of their own pocket in addition to what's the 25% that's withheld. And that's for the client's benefit and for our referral attorney's benefit and everybody involved. But technically by law, yes, some attorneys can pursue a 25% plus the administrative attorney's fees separately.
And one more question about just because this is something I've always wanted to know, and people do ask this: case gets remanded to the judge. Do federal courts remanded it? Do you get the sense that the judges kind of pick up that the reason the federal court remanded it was because there's a good reason for it, and they hint, you need to go ahead and approve this case, or is that not a factor at all?
Oh, sure, it's a factor. My experience, so I think the national statistic ballpark is that for cases that are remanded from federal court that go back for a new hearing, I think the national statistic is about 2/3 of those cases eventually get approved. So judges definitely take that message. They take it seriously. And yeah, it absolutely makes an impact. So just because you've lost before the ALJ and lost before appeals counsel doesn't mean that hope is lost, right? You can still get the case remanded and still win that case. And it happens every day.
Okay. All right, here's a question. SA, who is here a good bit, 13 to 15 migraines a month, multiple medication fails. I have one that works, but the frequency of the side effects are work prohibitive, other medical issues there. Now, migraine headaches are, for the most part, not going to be something you can image with an MRI or a CT.
Right.
Do you find that at the appeals level, more these subjective type problems are more difficult to convince the federal court to remand, or is it really comes down to just the error of analysis? What's your take on non-objective evidence type of matters?
So actually, we have great success on headaches cases. And this comes back, I talked about the listings earlier, and I mentioned migraine headaches. No, these cases actually do come back quite frequently because a lot of times the judges mess up the listing analysis. A lot of times judges, the ALJs at the administrative level, will find headaches to be severe, but then not account for functional limitations associated with headaches, such as difficulty with hearing and noise, background noise, or sometimes light sensitivity, like if you've got fluorescent lighting or sun lighting or computer screen lighting can come into play. Judges don't take that into account, but the federal judges look for those nuanced errors, and they will remand on them for sure. It's the ALJs that like to pretend your headaches don't have an impact, and that's I hate that. I'll be honest with you. I have a real pet peeve associated with migraine headache cases.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the cases that really bother me most are the PTSD cases, I guess I would say, because, especially military veterans who've just been through pure hell, and, you understand why they would have PTSD, and judges just sort of, get over it. Well, it doesn't quite work that way.
It doesn't work that way at all. Yeah. Just get over it. Don't worry about all, the horrific things you've seen.
Absolutely.
No, some of these judges like to pretend that there's no impact, and that's just simply not real life.
Yep. Here's a question Ron is asking about CDRs. I want to ask you about that. He's on SSDI as of August 26th, and his first payment will be 52. And so first question is, in your mind, is there any sort of age where a CDR is less likely? And then secondly, do you see CDR cases in your practice?
We do. I think that CDRs become less likely the older that you are. So probably decreased chances at age 52, 53, 55 and above. Certainly more of a chance if you happen to have been approved and you're 25, for instance. However, that doesn't mean that they won't happen. It doesn't mean that they can't happen. And it's always, generally speaking, advisable to continue treating so that you have that documented track record and continue to document it. Fastest way to get denied on a CDR is to stop going to treatment because you think that you've hit your maximum medical improvement anyway, and it's not helping you. True, maybe it's not realistically helping you, but when you get back to a CDR and you're having a Social Security hearing, it's going to be a real problem if you have no medical records. And a lot of times the judges like to deny because they say, well, if you were still not doing well, you would have continued treatment. I mean, it makes no sense, because if you've hit maximum medical improvement, you go to the doctor 1,000 times, it's not going to help you. But for Social Security purposes, you should really keep treating. You should get that documentation. And yes, we do see these cases at the federal level, but they do create at the federal level that they're problematic. I'll be honest with you, because the biggest cases, the most frequent type of cases that we get at the federal level are the ones where the claimant stopped treating. They stopped their treatment. So now I get a case before the federal level and I'm asked to evaluate it, and you have no treatment records from when the client was approved. It's sparse up until now the CDR. That's what I'm saying. That's the biggest problem. You have to keep treating. You have to keep going, even if you think it's not helping, because you need to make sure your proof is there in the event that Social Security rolls around and says, well, now it's time to check you out. You don't want to be in that position.
Yeah, and I always tell my clients that the absence of treatment, many judges or Social Security adjudicators will assume absence of treatment means absence of a problem. And it isn't always the case, but that's the way they look at it. All right, let me ask a kind of a practical question. Somebody's in a hearing, they have a low-paid judge, a judge that's a 25% approval rate judge, not going well. Is there anything that a claimant or an attorney can do during that hearing to sort of set up the case for appeal? Or is this just, you just have to take it as it comes with the decision?
Well, you take it as you have to take it as it comes with a decision part. But I do sometimes suggest to attorneys that there are certain types of questions that can be asked that can put a judge into a bit of a predicament. So, for instance, if somebody has mental limitations, hypothetically, and they, let's say, have some social limitations, and those social limitations the judge finds may cause occasional, let's say they find the claimant is limited to occasional contact with supervisors and coworkers. Well, one type of question that can be asked of the vocational expert by a claimant's attorney is, if somebody is limited to occasional contact with supervisors and or coworkers, would that impact the claimant's ability to complete a probationary period or training period? Same thing. Vocational experts a lot will be honest and say, if you're limited to occasional contact with supervisors and coworkers, an employee cannot complete a training period. Now that puts a judge into a predicament, because the judge then has to find ways around the occasional contact limitation. And it would take me a lot to explain the details of why that's a problem. And it would get into some technical nuances, but it creates a problem, it creates a predicament, and it puts the judge into a catch-22. And so in situations like that, yeah, you can kind of manufacture a reversible error to stick it to the judge later, and so that they get the case back.
Let me ask you about vocational witnesses. This is another area that, the folks that I deal with, they get very confused about it. You go to a hearing, there's this person there, they've never met before. I always tell them, of course, that the vocational witness will be there. But the vocational witness is talking about, all these different jobs that may exist and so forth. And I know in the Social Security community, in the NOSCR listserv, there's varying approaches to how to cross-examine a VE. What is your take on that in terms of, should you aggressively go after a VE? Should you wait and deal with it on appeal? What is your impression about how to deal with vocational witness testimony and dealing with the sources they come up with and the job numbers and things like that?
So I think that there are certain types of questions that you don't ask questions on, and there's certain types of questions that you do ask questions on. And I think that's where it becomes important for a claimant to hire an attorney that's good at what they do, right? So if somebody comes to you, they're going to know that they're in good hands. If somebody goes to somebody else, it depends. There's a lot of great attorneys out there, and there's some attorneys that are not so fantastic, and that's where the claimant has to make a judgment call on trying to make sure that they get a good attorney from the outset. That being said, there's a new rule that came out, which is called SSR 24-3P. Again, not going to get into the technical nuances here, but
And that's a ruling, but SSR means ruling. It's like a form of precedent. In other words.
Yep.
Okay.
Social Security rule, SSR. So that rule basically now kind of puts more of a requirement for attorneys to do more thorough cross-examinations, or at least there's an interpretation that this new law makes attorneys cross-examine more thoroughly than even they would before. So yes, aggressive cross-examination is important. There is a certain level of judgment that's required on it, depending on the issue. And that's why claimants really need to be selective and make sure that they pick a good attorney, because cross-examination does matter. Not every attorney can do it. But again, not every attorney should do it. It depends on the question and the issue. So you need a good attorney that can make those judgment calls. And it's not always an easy judgment call.
And it's done on the fly as well. I mean, not like you have a lot of time to think about it. Yeah,
you're right there. You're in the hearing. There's a VE right there on the phone or on the video. You have to ask on the spot as they're asking answering questions. You have to be sharp and on the fly. Yeah, you need to make sure that the attorney you're selecting is an attorney that can handle it.
I mean, I'm of the opinion that we don't really know how many jobs exist for any particular type of employment. I mean, they talk about there are 22,000 these jobs, and I know that you have the DOT and you have these other selected characteristics of employment and so forth. But reality is, I don't think anybody really knows how many jobs exist in a particular job category. Are the district courts, have they just kind of accepted that this is imperfect and we're just going to have to do with the best we can? Is that still fruitful in terms of making appeals based on lack of really good evidence about job numbers?
So this is one of those situations where the rules kind of vary across different jurisdictional boundaries across the country. Yes, judges at the federal level kind of do take it at face value to some extent. There are limitations on how much face value, but yes, some jurisdictions find, well, if the total job numbers are at least 10,000, that's good enough. Some jurisdictions say, no, that's not good enough. 20,000 has to be the number. Some take the position that you have to ask about regional job numbers, and if you don't do that it's a failure. Some jurisdictions take the position that if you don't ask about regional numbers, it doesn't matter. But the bottom line is they kind of take it at face value, but again, there's some nuances there. And absolutely, in my opinion, these numbers are just made up out of whole cloth. If the number of vocational experts out there who have put people in a specific job type, and the job, they're like, oh, there's 30,000 jobs in the national economy for this. They've probably put more than 30,000 claimants into those jobs just testifying. It's just, I don't know where they come up with their numbers. They claim that it's based on something. I think it's based on nothing, but we deal with it, and we do the best we can.
Yeah, and I think that some of these numbers are just kind of made up. And one of the things that, a lot of people, they hear this phrase, the DOT, Dictionary of Occupational Titles. Tell our audience, about this. This is just something that just boggles my mind. This is a resource that is way outdated, but they still use it. What is the possible rationale for using a resource that has not been updated in 30-something years?
I have a case law. There's case law out there where one judge basically said that if that this document is so old that it would be a running joke amongst jurists, meaning attorneys, and they basically did call it that, a running joke, and that's what it is. It's 40 years old. It's not been updated. It's almost ridiculous, but yet Social Security Administration relies on it. And as a result, it's basically the manual that we all have to live by, and we deal with it. We just have to work with it.
Yeah, it is pretty insane. And I will say, more recently there have been a number of jobs that Social Security has come out with these messages and saying, do not consider these jobs anymore. I mean, back in the day, I used to see a lot of cases denied because a person could be a surveillance system monitor. Well, they've realized that there really are no surveillance system monitors out there, or that the job, let's say photocopy attendant, is actually requires you to do computer work. It's not really an unskilled job. So, I think that, I know that with this ruling, the VEs are talking about where their numbers come from, but still, it's just a very, very rough guess. My sense is, although, is that, I think everybody realizes that it's really flawed, but, unless the courts are going to basically just say, well, we have no numbers, it's going to put the whole system into chaos. And, and then I think then it becomes a real issue, because, how could they turn anybody down if they don't have any evidence to show that there are jobs out there? What is your take now? I know that we had a commissioner, Martin O'Malley, in the last administration. He's gone. We have a new commissioner, Frank Big. I'm not sure I pronounce his last name. Anyway, Frank B.
So
that.
Frank B. Bizignano, or I think it is.
Bizignano.
Right.
What is the impact of a commissioner in the Social Security world? How important is that in terms of lawmaking, rulemaking, things like that? Any sense of that, or is that even something you don't even deal with?
Well, it can be an impact, because it can impact whether they're trying to change specific rules. Like I mentioned, the SSR earlier, Social Security rules. They could impact whether they're trying to add or change some of the SSRs or some other rules and regulations. It could impact on their policies on how to handle cases that are appealed to the federal level. It could impact the staffing. Like, there's shortages in staff now. The people have been laid off and terminated, and that's impacting case processing at all levels, including the federal level. There's a lot of overwhelmed employees now because of that. So it does have an impact, and it can impact a particular case, and it can impact at different various levels, in fact. So yeah, it matters, and I don't know how this particular new commissioner is going to handle things. It's a little too early to tell, but time will tell.
I know that there was a lot of discussion about Elon Musk and the Doge people coming into the system. Did you notice anything on your end when that was all going on? It seems to have kind of blown over a little bit, but was there anything going on at the federal level that changed with all that?
Sure, it's still happening.
Really?
There's been a huge volume of layoffs. So a lot of attorneys, skilled attorneys on the defense side, who understood how this system ran and nuanced issues and could handle discussion on issues in a case, they've been laid off. They've forced into retirement. The volume of qualified attorneys that have been laid off or fired entirely and forced into resignation is staggering. They're losing a lot of manpower. The attorneys that are there are backed up. They're overwhelmed with work, and there's a lot of complaints because of it. A lot of attorneys were virtualized. They worked from home. That was partly why they took the position to begin with. And quite frankly, the attorneys did a fine job from home, right? They have ethical obligations. They're overseen by not just Social Security, but their duty and obligation to the court. So but then they were being forced back into the office. So yes, policies matter, and the policies did have a very big impact at the federal level, for sure. And I see it even today, right now. I got emails even this week saying, I'm sorry, but I'm retiring. I'm not able to talk to you about this case any longer.
Wow. Well, I mean, at my level, I mean, the initial applications, when I first started doing, I've been doing this about 35 years, 4 or 5 months, you get a decision. Now, 8 to 12 months, in some places even longer. Reconsideration, 8, 10, 12 months. Hearings, 5 or 6 months. It's not unusual for me to try cases for people who applied 3 years ago. And, that's a real problem, because how do you eat, for 3 years while you're waiting, which actually is another issue that pops up. People try to work part-time because they have to. Is that something that the federal courts have a problem with? people collecting unemployment or taking a part-time job, does that hurt them? Do you find that the federal courts seem to see that as inconsistent with being disabled?
Yeah, it can be, but they don't really approach it like that. You could kind of tell it when it slights or slants the opinion. If somebody's working, they may very well see, well, if you're working, that you're unable to, you're not disabled. If you're able to work to some extent, you're able to work, period. And some judges don't care, right? It's still a legal error is a legal error. But I think it can impact if somebody's doing something. It impacts your ability to advocate strongly that this person is disabled. So like I said earlier, I take cases, I don't worry about whether somebody's disabled or not. I look for legal rules, legal errors, to see where the ALJ messed up. However, whether somebody's disabled or not does come into play to some extent. And if somebody's working, and they're working 20 hours a week, I understand the difficulties that the claimants have not working because they need to put food on the table. But it does create an advocacy problem because now I'm saying, but there's harm. The harm is that the claimant should have been found disabled. Well, it hurts my ability to argue the harm, right? So it does come into play and it can be a problem. But I also understand on the flip side, some people do work. The way I see it is it's really a decision between the claimant and their attorney, whether they should be working or whether it's going to be a problem or not, and that they should really consult with their attorney at the hearing level to make an educated and informed decision about whether it's a problem or not.
In my practice, I mean, I tell people, look, SGA is $1,620 a month gross. If you're working and you're earning $1,000, $1,200 a month, you're far enough away from SGA where I don't know that a judge is going to feel like you're suppressing your income. But if you're at $1,550, $1,575 month after month, the risk is that a judge would feel like you're purposely keeping it just below SGA. And that's where that could become a problem, especially if it's just month after month after month. But again, if you got to eat, you got to eat, and you have shelter. It's you're waiting that long. It's a real issue. All right, let me pop into some of the questions. I got a couple more for you. I know you're going to leave us in about 20 minutes because you told me beforehand you had a very early morning, so we'll respect that. Okay. All right. So Kevin says the onset date, and I took this one for a specific reason. He's 59. He's going to be 60. The ALJ hearings in 4 or 5 months would be a victim of the change in the onset date. My experience has been that the difference between 53 and a half and 55 can be a problem because judges will move you to 55. I don't normally find in my practice, at least, if you're 59, that they're going to move you to 60. There is a difference between being 59 and 60 when it comes to the grid rules, and there's a PALMS regulation that talks about transferability of skills analysis. But that's normally not where I see the problem. It's normally at 49 to 50 or 53 and a half to 50 to 55. So Kevin, I suspect that probably won't be an issue for you, but we never know. But that's my take on it. Christina says hello. Christina's a regular, and she's always very positive, which we really appreciate that. So is Rodney, one of our former clients. We appreciate seeing him here. Let's see. Wayne is 8 months in the process, still waiting for an initial decision. And what I'm telling people, Wayne, and you probably heard me talk about this before, once you get beyond 7 or 8 months, I'm telling people to reach out to their U.S. senators and ask for a congressional inquiry. And that tends to speed things along. I don't know, does that have any effect at the appeals level, the federal court level, a congressional inquiry, or is that just more at the ALJ level?
That's at the ALJ level.
Yep.
There's, you're kind of at the federal level, you're stuck at the mercy of the court. Fortunately, most judges move quickly or quickly enough. I mean, it's not really always a fast, situation anyway, but some districts are very slow, very slow.
Yep.
And there's nothing you can do about it. Your hands are tied. You just have to wait till the judge makes a decision.
Yeah, it's very frustrating. very, very frustrating, not just waiting for a hearing date,
Mhm.
but then when the hearing is done and you're waiting 3 or 4 months for a written decision. That's not as common anymore, but it can happen at times. Wayne asked another question here, which I think I know the answer to. If a person surgery is recommended, a fusion surgery, I'm assuming that Social Security, the courts do not punish a person or hold it against them for not undergoing an invasive surgical procedure. I think there's even a ruling to that effect, but I'm guessing that is not an issue if you have a good reason for it. Correct? Am I seeing that correctly?
Yeah, I don't see a court holding it against anybody for not undergoing invasive surgical procedure. If anything, the fact that you've had the invasive surgical procedure recommended is probably even in your favor, just the mere
Yep.
fact that it was recommended.
Yep, I would agree. I would agree. All right, and this is more of a big picture question, JTL, BZ. Where are they going to cut Social Security because of the trust fund situation? And again, you may not deal with this at all. Any sense of, there's a trust fund that's going to run out of money in 10 years. Any changes in the way things are operating? Are judges aware of that? Is that something that even enters in their calculations, or they're just dealing with day-to-day case processing?
No change whatsoever at my level. If anything, things are moving along just as always. And my personal opinion, I think this is more political rhetoric for news than it is a realistic issue. I think that everything will continue moving forward into the future. It's going to be real hard for people to just start, the politicians to start cutting Social Security because the trust fund is running down. They're going
Yeah.
to have to find a way to make it work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, my guess would be, if let's say it's going to run out of money in, 2033, in November of 2032, there'll be some sort of an emergency move to,
Mhm.
whether it's raise the retirement age or change the earnings limit for contributions, but they'll have to come up with something. They're not going to, it's too toxic. Social Security is too toxic. And the AARP is too strong to let Social Security be cut. So I think that's,
Yeah.
I would kind of
Print.
agree.
They're gonna print more money and make sure Social Security
Yeah.
is there, and we'll just have lots more inflation, is what we're gonna have. But
Yeah,
Social Security will
I
be there.
guess so. I guess so. All right, Charity's saying you're at the federal level, and again, as you know, it's long waits, and it's and what I think I read someplace that the percentage of cases that that attorneys, like you said, will have to agree to take, but the ones that actually do go, it's a fairly high percentage, what, 50 or 60% that actually an attorney would take actually do get remanded from the federal court level. It's pretty high.
Yeah, it is pretty high. I think that the national statistic varies from year to year in the anywhere from 45 to upwards of close to 60% on a national average. I think our average is actually much higher than that. It depends on the jurisdiction, actually. We have jurisdictional statistics. Some jurisdictions are more conservative than others, but I think across the board, we're getting remands in at least 75% of cases.
Wow. Okay.
So we've got a very high, we accept a lot of cases. We get a lot of remands. I could probably get a higher remand rate if I took less cases and was more selective. But my view on it is, some people deserve a chance anyway, even if it's kind of like a close call case. And so we're a little bit liberal in the types of cases we take, and we still have a high remand rate. But yeah, national statistics are decent. Our statistics are even stronger than that.
Can you talk for a little bit about the appeals council versus district court? I've never really had a clear idea of the difference in terms of what they're looking for. Can you just expand on that a little bit? What the difference is, what they're looking for, and why the appeals council remand rate is so much lower than federal court?
Yeah, so I'm not, quite frankly, I don't even know what they're looking for. I mean, if I'm looking at cases of the appeals council, I have no idea. So they sometimes remand on things you have no idea what they're doing. Um, I sometimes they remand on similar issues you find at the federal level. Sometimes they remand on policy related issues that they have internally that have nothing to do with what we're really trying to argue at the federal level. But yeah, by and large, the reasons that you get remanded at the appeals council level is is smaller percentages on remands, and sometimes I have no idea what I can't even tell you honestly. It's anybody's guess sometimes. Federal
Yeah,
level, it's a little bit more an understanding of what's going on, but at the administrative appeals council, Wish I could
Nobody
tell you.
really knows.
Honestly.
Yeah, it is. It just always struck me as being very odd because, again, you'll sometimes see remands and makes no sense. I mean, I don't, with a remand for an issue that wasn't even raised in the brief.
Right.
They just kind
I
of
have
come up with
no idea.
something. And like you said, it's probably internal politics. All right, Munir Jafar, how long does it take to get a denial? You're into 18 months. That's way too long. I would tell you,
Wow.
you should contact your U.S. senator, representative to find out what's going on. It should not take 18 months. That's way, way, way too long. Jen is my paralegal in sunny Lincoln, Nebraska. She's saying, I hope everybody has a wonderful week. Yeah, we're totally, I don't know, you're in New York. Are you remote or do you actually have people go to your office? Are you, everybody in office?
Oh, our people, yeah, our paralegals all work from the office. We don't have any remote paralegals. However, our attorneys are remote and are all over the country, Oklahoma, Florida, elsewhere. Yeah, almost all of our attorneys are elsewhere, but all of our paralegal staff is here.
Yeah, well, it's really amazing. I mean, before COVID, everybody was local. The staffing was all local, and then post COVID, of course, everything went virtual. Hearings are by phone or by video, and then staffing wise, I mean, I am completely remote. I mean, I'm working out. This is my house. You can probably tell it's my messy basement in the background here. But I have an office. I go in once a week to check the mail, but I work for pretty most part at home. But everybody is remote. We have people in multiple states, and with Dropbox and with the Google Docs and with all the phone systems, it's really pretty easy to do. It's really, again, for someone like me who's been doing this for 30 something years, it's just a major sea change. So it is kind of crazy. Speaking of sea changes, let me ask you about AI, because I know that you've released a product that you are making available to attorneys to do case prep, which I want you to tell me about that. But in a bigger picture, what is the impact of AI going to be in the Social Security adjudication process, if you've got an opinion about that?
Yeah, so I think that lawyers need to remain cutting edge on this. I think lawyers, quite frankly, that are not advancing with the times and getting involved with artificial intelligence are going to have a harder time staying on top of things, because the artificial intelligence really does streamline the ability to analyze medical records, prep for a hearing, prep documents for a hearing, memorandums for a hearing. And it really helps an attorney stay on top of things, move quicker, get things done faster, be more thorough, create checklists. It's like having a whole separate assistant who's detail oriented and fast. And so, yes, I have very strong opinions about AI, and I think it's when clients are looking for an attorney, knowing that your attorney is AI integrated or AI integrating with the current trends and movements is important to know. So yes, I absolutely have some very strong opinions on that.
Yeah, no, we're really incorporating that a lot in our office. Although you have to be very, very careful because number one, there's secure client confidences. You got to make sure that it's contained AI. And then the second thing
Right.
is,
Yes.
and for those of you who are not aware, there's a concept called hallucinations, where AI like ChatGPT will make things up that sound really good, but that are absolutely just totally made up. And there have been some cases, very famous cases, that have come down where attorneys have submitted briefs to federal court in big cases that the sites were just made up. And the judges, needless to say, were not very happy that they made things up. So, when I use it, I'm using a very self-contained type of AI system, and then I double check the sites to make sure that if I'm citing, I had one today I was looking at, and it gave me a page number. I looked at that page number, and it was not what it said it was. So I found it, replaced that particular site. But you can't assume anything. You've got to assume it's got to be, it's really got to be double and triple checked, because you can get yourself in a lot of trouble submitting something to court. Now, this product that you've released, tell me about that, because I know there are attorneys on here as well. Tell me about what you're making available to those of us in the trenches here.
So we developed what we call the AI hearing prep paralegal, and it's a powered by ChatGPT. It's prompt engineered, and we provided it free of charge to attorneys. And it's specifically for attorneys. It's not for claimants. This is for professional use only. And for attorneys to be able to analyze medical records, automatically analyze opinion evidence, automatically create pre-hearing memorandums, and we've released it to the bar of attorneys. And like I said, it was free so that they can use it to enhance their practices and better represent their clients. But like you pointed out, ChatGPT, including my AI hearing prep paralegal, is not perfect. It does hallucinate. And I've explained to people, like you pointed out, ChatGPT will actually, it could analyze records and find information in the records that's helpful, but provide an improper citation. Like it makes up citations. It does sometimes even make up law. So it's not something that's advisable for a claimant to say, well, I'm going to prep my case by myself. I have ChatGPT. Well, ChatGPT is not a lawyer. ChatGPT does have fantastic functions, but you do still need a professional to look at it and determine whether or not the information that's being produced is correct and accurate, whether it cites to the proper places, whether it cites to proper law, whether it cites the proper listings. But it is an amazing tool nonetheless. And I've created this. I've become a bit obsessed with AI in a way. And I created this, and I spent a lot of time dealing with ChatGPT and developing of GPTs and artificial intelligence programs for legal professionals, for us and for other lawyers. And that was something I created. And because I don't do administrative work at all, I'm strictly at the federal level, I decided to create this and offer it free of charge to other attorneys so that we can all have the benefit of this as this grows into the future.
Yeah, no, I think that it's definitely the wave, and we're taking a lot of effort. It can be a little bit overwhelming because there are a lot of AI engines. I mean, ChatGPT is the most well known. I use Notebook LM, which is more self-contained, but there's a number of other ones, Perplexity and Claude and all these other ones, and you just have to kind of jump in at some point and figure out what works, and then kind of grow from there. But it is truly a game changer. I mean, again, when I first started, I mean, I remember when we got our first fax machine, if I gathered around the fax machine and wow, there's something coming out of here. And it was such a big deal. And now, we've got artificial intelligence that's doing analysis. And of course, you touched on it, but the prompting is the key, is knowing how to ask the right questions. You'll get good responses out of it. But yeah, I'm looking forward to kind of jumping into what you've done, because I've used some ChatGPT, but been very, very, careful about it, because, I just don't want to, do anything that's going to jeopardize the confidence of my client, nor do I want to, put anything out there that would be just, hallucinations, which is, again, what's making stuff up.
You have to be careful, and the key is the prompts, and the key is training the GPT. So it's not enough to simply just use ChatGPT, but you have to create it in a way that properly trains it so that it knows what it's doing. It has this appearance of knowing everything when you ask it simple questions, but in reality, it doesn't necessarily know everything. You have to train it first, and that's where the time comes in. And honestly, to prepare the AI hearing prep paralegal for other attorneys, I can't even tell you the amount of hours that went into that. It even, getting even the prompts to work properly so that it produced proper documents, and even then it still hallucinates. It's just not perfect. It's still a growing field.
Yep, and I think it's going to continue to evolve. All right. Susan Schmidt, 16 months of waiting for initial. Again, Susan, way too long. You've requested the congressional inquiry, which is good. You faxed the adjudicator, that makes sense. But and you sent those this week. That's good, because you should get a response. That's just way too long. And what happens is that sometimes these cases get stuck. They get or that you get denied and they don't tell you. That happens. I've seen cases where, we'll be, somebody will contact me and it's, 18 months. We'll check in with the adjudicator. Oh, that case was denied, 15 months ago. Well, nobody told the claimant, and it's very hard to prove they didn't get a letter. So, if it's something taking that long, you definitely want to, again, my opinion is 6-7 months. Let's see here. Okay. We got Bryan for another 5 or 6 minutes. So let's see if we got any, Okay, this is more of a procedural question. You did Bo did his application online, used the upload documents, upload the forms, but still got an email asking for them. This is very common. Social Security will, you can send them something, then they'll ask for it again, and that's just what they do. That's just what they do. So you can't assume they're very efficient. Again, a lot of people working really hard, but they're understaffed and overwhelmed, and that's just going to happen. Elliot got awarded. Good for you, Elliot. I'm glad to hear. I know you've been here before. You're going to be 62. They reevaluate you. Probably not at 62. Would being on short or long-term disability be a positive for SSDI? Different standards. I mean, short and long-term disability have different definitions of disability. Many times it's about your ability to perform your past work, as opposed to Social Security, which is about anything. So, they'll look at it, but I mean, it really, in my opinion, doesn't really have much impact. What about, ask me about, and GI Jose or Joe, I know, he's a Vietnam vet. What's your sense? Is there any value, any impact of 100% VA disability rating in Social Security world, or is that just a completely different standard?
It's a completely different standard.
Yep.
And it's unfortunate, honestly, because Social Security doesn't seem to, I hate to say it, they don't seem to care much about your VA disability rating. And meanwhile, we're talking about veterans who served our country and put their lives on the line and now, suffer from PTSD and other conditions. And the Social Security Administration is like, we don't care. They care about your underlying conditions for sure. I'm not saying that they don't care about you or your conditions, but they don't care whether, VA found you to be completely disabled. And when you are, instead, they're going to say whether or not you can, perform a job like stuffing bags as a cashier or something. But you were a veteran. It's really not a fair analysis, but this is the system we have to deal with. And so we, like I said before, we do the best we can.
Yeah, but I've always been, one thing that's always bothered me is I've had a number of female veterans who have been sexually assaulted in the military. And for some reason, that just doesn't move the meter with ALJs. I never understood it because, I mean,
Yep.
a lot of these women are, they've got superior officers who take advantage of that position. And, this can go on for months or years. And then they finally report it and they don't get believed and the person gets transferred and they're damaged. But Social Security just like, well, it's just not a factor. It blows my mind, but that's
Right.
That's what they do. That's what they do. All right. And Charity is talking about and I'm not sure. And again, look, there are a lot of people who do this kind of work, do federal work, and I will say this from my experience. And again, I'm dealing with stuff at the hearing level. There are not a lot of people like Bryan who really know what they're doing. You can't dabble in federal appeals work for Social Security. You can't really dabble with federal work at all in general. But this is not something that a new attorney is going to take on. Again, I've been doing disability work for 35 years. I've done a couple of appeals myself, but after realizing it's a very different practice area, and I made the decision a long time ago. I'm going to bring on people who know what they're doing, as opposed to trying to guess, because you can really screw up. Because federal court, and again, it's been a long time since I did one completely on my own, but I mean, you've got requirements for the number of pages and the margins and the type size. I mean, I did a lot of bankruptcy work, and I remember, just the the specifics of the margins and the font size. Judges wouldn't consider an argument because you didn't have the right paperwork or the right paper. So it's a very, very different kind of practice, and you want to have somebody who can focus on the substance, not the form. And again, there's not a lot of people who really know what they're doing out there. Bryan happens to be one of them, which is why I'm on here. But it is not something you want to dabble with, I think. I'm sure. Do you ever see situations where you get cases after somebody maybe shouldn't have gotten into this, and you've got to kind of clean it up? Does that ever happen to you?
Yeah, I mean, I've had attorneys come to me who realized that they got into it and shouldn't have been into it, and asked us to take a look at cases to see if we would, take them over, because they, now they've got 3 or 4 of these, and they're like, I'm busy, and I don't know really what I'm doing on this. And yeah, sure, we take a look at them, see if we can handle them. But we still screen them the same as we do usually. So sometimes the attorney picks up a case they shouldn't have touched, because they didn't understand that there was no error, and now they're jammed up and in the federal court system with really no viable case. But there was one case where, one situation where an attorney came to us, we actually picked up all of their cases. They happened to pick up cases that had viable issues, but they weren't in a position to litigate them. So yes, the short answer to your question is yes.
Yeah, no, it's hard. This is really a practice area, in my opinion. You can't really dabble in anyway. And again, the ALJ level is, it's there are more difficult areas of law, in my opinion, but you still got to know what you're doing, because there's a lot of procedures. And one of the things that I listen to my hearings, and actually that's another question. I'll ask a couple more and let you run. When you listen to hearings, and I assume that you listen to the audio when you're doing an appeal, what are things that jump out at you, maybe that attorneys are not doing well, that are just mistakes, that are just something that you just see over and over and over, that make you want to pull your hair out?
Yeah, so sometimes I've seen a couple times. I've seen attorneys ask questions, and then because they asked one too many questions, the wrong type of question in the circumstances, it eliminated the legal error that I had to work with at the federal level. So there was, an error that existed. The error was harmful, and then the attorney asked a question of the vocational expert, and the vocational expert fixed the error. And so then there's no issue. That happens. That drives me nuts when that happens, because then my hands are tied. But other times, sometimes the attorneys don't ask deep enough questions. And I ask attorneys frequently enough, please try to ask certain questions, let's say about the ability to handle a training period with occasional contact. And I even put out a book for attorneys so that they had a list of questions that they could ask, because I find that sometimes attorneys need a list of questions, and I've distributed that as well. We created that book, just like the AI hearing prep paralegal was free. We gave the book away for free. We've given away, hundreds of copies of that book to attorneys as well. And so I think it's more a matter of asking the right questions at cross exam.
What I was saying was that I have a list of my questions, and I make sure that I cover at every single hearing, because you need to have these things on the record. How long somebody can sit or stand or walk or lift or things like that, just so you can make a prima facie case, so that at least the person's testified about it. I had a hearing today. Example, my client had the medical record's very clear. He's blind in one eye. He's got 20/60 vision in the other eye. The judge is hypothetical, no visual limitations. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
And so again, hopefully we'll get approved. But if he's not, I'm like, that to me is just ridiculous. But again, I don't want to, you got to sort of know when to leave things there, so that it could be something that would be appealable if the judge is not inclined to appeal it. So, okay, well, we're in an hour. I know you told me you wanted to run after an hour. Hopefully we can do this again. I really appreciate your time. I know everybody else does. Any closing thoughts about, well, let me ask you this. I know that you pretty much take your cases on referral from other attorneys. I assume that's where you get most of them. For the attorneys who are watching this, how would they get a hold of you? What's the best way to reach out to you for them to have you look at some of these ALJ denials?
Yeah, just email me. It's the easiest way. It's fastest. Everybody's busy. You don't have to get on the phone and have a long conversation with me. It's appeals@thefederalappealsfirm.com or thefederalappealsfirm@gmail.com. Either way, you can reach me. It's simple enough. Or you can find us on the web at thefederalappealsfirm.com. Again, simple enough. So, but yeah, if anybody needs to reach out, by all means. And listen, I had a really great time here at the podcast. This is fantastic. What you're doing here for everybody is amazing, and I'd be happy to come back another time.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate that. I know you were up really early this morning, so you get a good night's sleep. But we'll definitely do it again. But I appreciate, I think it's really helpful to sort of have somebody talk about what happens after the ALJ level, because I look at when I get a remand, if you get a case remanded, I look at very closely at that. And there's your LinkedIn profile, you have a lot of information there. You'll post videos. There's a couple other people who will post things, and it's actually, you learn a lot just by seeing some of the decisions that have been remanded because of you have the federal court judges telling the ALJs, look, you made a mistake here, and this
Yep.
is this is the way the law needs to be applied, and then you can use that, like you said, the example you gave about the probationary period. That's something that is not doesn't it's not something that would be obvious, but it makes a lot of sense. That if you can't get through that, you're not going to be able to sustain work. And again, it can put the judge in a very difficult situation. That's part of my questions now, so that which I learned from you, so that I'm making sure that if that issue comes up, that I definitely explore it. So anyway, I appreciate it very much, Bryan. We'll again do it again sometimes. Get a good night's sleep, and we will talk very soon.
Thanks. I really appreciate it. Have a nice night to you and to everybody watching. Very
good. Thank you. All right. Okay. So I hope everybody found that useful. Again, Bryan's an excellent attorney, and I'm very fortunate. One of the things when you do this for a while is you start to make contacts among people who know different things or know more than you do about certain things. And so I've again made it my practice that rather than dabble in something I don't do on a 24-hour basis, I would much rather get somebody in like Bryan who that's what he does. And again, there's other folks that I've worked with at the appellate level that are very, very good. It really makes life a lot easier, and I feel like I'm giving my client really the benefit of their experience as well as my own. But you can see a guy like Bryan. I mean, I think he's somewhat typical about lawyers in this practice area. It's not a lot of practice areas. It's very, very competitive. People are fighting over cases. This is a very cooperative practice area. So, I get people all the time reaching out to me. Can you explain to me how this works? Can you walk me through? I have tomorrow I'm speaking with an attorney who had started doing this kind of work. She has a case that, is a little bit beyond what she knows. Can I bring you into it? Yes, we're meeting with the client tomorrow by Zoom. And, I'm going to sort of take over as lead counsel. She'll be, sort of co-counsel. And that's the sort of thing that this practice area is really good for. So I think that, part of, getting an attorney, you're getting the benefit of, people like Bryan, people that are willing to share, like on the NOSCR listserv. And it's very, very pleasant area of practice in that regard. All right, let's go to some more questions. Golfer Pro 12. One in remand and one in front of a new ALJ. Took 6 years, if you can imagine that, to get there. 3 ALJs. The appeals attorney split the cost, and that's what I typically do. Is I'll work out a deal with the attorney who's handling the appeal, and like Bryan said, we'll work out a deal where the client, is not going to pay any more than 25%. There wouldn't be a cap on it, but it would be no more than 25%. But 6 years is a ridiculous amount of time. It really is. I rip DT. I have a spinal cord lesion and myelopathy. The ALJ never mentions denial. I know ALJs don't have to mention all evidence. That seems erroneous. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think that something that significant as a lesion on your spinal cord and myelopathy, which is a complication of that, pain, it's going to be, it's documented. It's not mentioned in the denial. For an ALJ to ignore back issues like that, it appears that would seem to me to be reversible error. Now, again, I would caution you, read that decision very, very carefully, because sometimes people think the ALJ didn't mention it, but maybe they use different words. But if in fact the ALJ did not mention it, and it's it's a documented medical problem, then that seems to me that would be reversible. W. Sugar Bear, what CDR stands for Continuing Disability Review. And basically, when somebody is approved for disability, Social Security has the right to do what is called a review at some point after they're approved. And they can basically send you a form. It's either a short form or a long form. The short form is like 5 or 6 questions. The long form is a little more involved. They want to make sure that you are still disabled. And so if they do a review, they can either conclude, yes, you are still disabled, no change, or we think there's been medical improvement and we're going to move to cut you off. Now you can appeal that, and you can appeal that and take it in front of a judge. You can file a reconsideration of so let's say you get a notice of termination of benefits. You can appeal that, file a request for reconsideration like you did at your initial, when you filed for application, or filed for benefits initially. and then you request a hearing. The problem you run into is that if you get a CDR and they move to terminate, they will tell you you have the option of having your benefits continue while you appeal. That sounds great. You keep getting paid while you appeal. The problem is no past due benefits. So if you're talking to get an attorney involved, somebody like me, and there's no past due benefits, I can't take it under a no fee unless you win contingency. So I'm going to say to somebody who's already keeping benefits going, I need X number of dollars in my trust account, to bill against, and it may be $4,000 or $5,000, to take care of the case all the way through a hearing. Or you can say, I will have benefits terminate, and then I'll build up some past due benefits where an attorney could take it on a contingency. But that means for the next 1.5 to 2 years, you have no money coming in. So it puts you in a very, very difficult situation. So as Bryan mentioned, the best thing you can do is after you're approved, keep going to the doctor so that if you do get one of these letters asking for you to give information, this does not mean you're terminated, it just means they're asking for information. You can point to the fact that you've continued to go to the doctor, that nothing has really changed, you're taking medication, you're undergoing therapy, whatever you need to do, so that Social Security will conclude that your disability continues and that they will not move for termination. Because if they move for termination, that puts you in a very, very difficult situation as in terms of, do you have benefits continue, but then not be able to hire an attorney under contingency, or you have benefits stop, means you don't eat or have shelter. So very, very difficult situation there. All motor, I've just approved, 43 years old, 2 LJ hearings. And I will tell you, all motor, that 43 years old, that's always an issue, because anybody who is under 50, it is a real uphill battle. And to win at 43, you've got to have something fairly significantly wrong with you. So good for you. Now, you said you have a continuing disability review, so it looks like you were approved when you were perhaps in your early 40s or late 30s, and you actually went to a hearing. And again, that's to your credit, that's a real difficult thing to do, but you made it work. Good for you. Good for you. Okay. If a claimant's case is remanded back to the LJ where they have a new claim at the recon level, what is the chance the two cases will be combined? You generally want that to happen. And what we're talking about here is you file your case, you go to a hearing, you lose, you file to the appeals council. At that point, you can't file a new case. But then when you file to go to district court, you can then start a new case. And again, the new case would be for benefits as of the date after the denial. And then if it gets remanded back, you have two cases going on at the same time. Generally speaking, what I would do is I would ask Social Security to combine those two things so that it's all done in one hearing. So if you win, you'll get ongoing benefits as opposed to having two separate hearings for two separate cases. So that's generally speaking what the preferred practice is, to combine them together. Is it uncommon for a decision to still be made a new claim at recon rather than being combined? I think it's unusual to get a case approved at recon in general. If you look at the statistics, the so-called waterfall chart, and I've got it, if you go to my blog, I have a blog at ssdanswers.com. I've got a copy of that waterfall chart there. I think at reconsideration, I want to say it's 18% of cases that are appealed to reconsideration actually get approved. It's about 35% at initial. It's about 50%, 49-50% in hearing. So the recon stage is the lowest administrative stage. It's just not real likely. So, given that you were already turned down before, probably not very likely you're going to get approved at recon. Could happen, but probably not. Supposedly you get SSDI approved. When you keep saying medical records for CDRs, what does regular visits mean? Generally speaking, it just means continue going to the doctor. It means that you want to make sure that Social Security will see that you are going to the doctor. You're seeking ongoing medical treatment, whether it's just medication management. Periodically, if it's a physical problem, you're getting an X-rays or MRIs. Just that you're undergoing treatment. And look, as Bryan pointed out, some of this treatment may be kind of useless. I mean, you may be what they call maximum medical improvement. And I'll give you an example. I had a case one time where my client went to the doctor. Doctor basically said the only thing that's going to really help you is a very invasive fusion, multi-level fusion. But the problem is that, there's no guarantee you're going to get better. You may come out worse or the same. And if you don't want to have the surgery, the only thing I can do for you is send you to long-term pain management. My client, went to long-term pain management. They wanted to give him opioids. He was not into that. So basically he just stays at home, probably to this day, in his recliner, has very little quality of life, but he's just there. Well, going to the doctor isn't really going to help him because there's nothing they can really do. But I told him, I said, once or twice a year, make an appointment with your family doctor, go in and just have the doctor confirm that nothing has changed. And so that if you have a CDR, you can say, well, I've gone to the doctor twice a year, nothing has changed. I'm still not going to undergo surgery. I've not had a spontaneous improvement. And that's what it is. So you really have to just keep going to the doctor. It's kind of a waste of time and money, but if you can do that, it's much better than not going at all. Because I think the problem is, let's say that 4 years from now, they do a review, a long form review. And on the long form review, it's ask about your doctor's appointments. And you put in there, hey, I have not gone to the doctor. Nothing doctor can do for me. Well, again, Social Security's position is you're not going to the doctor, therefore there's really nothing wrong with you. It doesn't make any sense, but that's the way they look at it. So, again, not every time. I mean, certain cases are going to be coded as not medical improvement, not likely. But, I think it is, especially if you try to work and there's a little bit of earnings and you're not going to the doctor, they could very well conclude that you have some medical improvement that would support a move to terminate. And look, there is a real push in Congress to get people off the disability rolls. There's, as we talked about it before, the trust fund is running out of money. They will fix it. Bryan is of the opinion, I agree with him, that they will fix this at some point. But, the fewer people that are claiming Social Security disability, the less they have to fix. So, easy target is the 35-year-old who's been on disability for 10 years because of schizophrenia or severe bipolar disorder, and they've stopped going to the doctor. There's nothing they can really be done for them. Easy to move to terminate that. So that's what you got to be careful about. Okay, John Calamus. Good evening. I'm 64, retired at 62. To get your early retirement, I have a hearing in September at Tampa. Can you please discuss how you complete the pre-hearing brief? Thanks for all you do. All right, well, what I do is I use in my brief, there's something called the 5-step sequential evaluation process. And basically what that is, Social Security has a process where adjudicators and judges have to evaluate claims using this 5-step process. And the process is as follows. Step 1, are you working? Are you engaged in substantial gainful activity? And remember, in 2025, $1,620 a month is SGA. So the first question they're asking is, are you working and earning more than $1,620 a month? If you are, it doesn't matter what's wrong with you, they assume you're not disabled. Okay, so that's the first question, because again, Social Security defines disability in terms of how your medical problems prevent you from engaging in substantial gainful activity. So if you are engaged in SGA level work, by definition, you are not disabled. That is step 1. So in my pre-hearing brief, I'll say, I'll set out the facts, the person's age, education, past work, and then I'll talk about, I'll go through the 5-step sequential process. So step 1 is the person working, no. And usually Social Security at the administrative level has made a decision that the person stopped working at SGA level when they said they stopped, when they claimed that they were. Sometimes they decide that it was 6 or 7 months later because there was some other income, and we have to decide whether we want to challenge that or not. But one way or the other, we're going to conclude that they're not engaged in SGA level work. So step 1 is you're not engaged in substantial gainful activity. Step 2 is, do you have severe impairments? I didn't really ask Bryan about this, but I'll talk about this for a second. Is step 2 is you have severe impairments, and it used to be anything was considered severe. You could have a hangnail, it was considered severe. They've backed off on that a little bit. Now it generally has to be a medical problem that has been identified, diagnosed by a doctor. So if you list on your application that you have sleep apnea, but there are no sleep studies, there's no CPAP machine, there's no evidence of any medical problem other than you're saying it is, a judge could decide, or a subcommittee can decide, this is a non-severe impairment. However, if you have an MRI that shows a bulging disc or a herniated disc, you can say, well, my back problem is a severe impairment. So, step 2 is, do you have one or more severe impairments? Let me just talk about that for a second, because sometimes I see cases where people apply and they list 15 things going on. They've got sleep apnea, they've got lupus, they've got CRPS, which is a chronic pain condition. They have hypertension, they have high cholesterol. And some of these things, there's little to no treatment, or there's little to no evidence that there are any functional limitations. I'm of the belief, I didn't ask Bryan about this, but he and I talked about this a little bit before we got on. When you're applying for disability, you can list 30 things. But, I think you're best off, in my opinion, to limit it to 3 to 5, no more than 3 to 5. You can list those other things, but there's a pretty good chance, unless you're getting treatment, unless there's functional issues that arise, that Social Security will conclude that these are not severe impairments at step 2 of that process. So again, what I'm going to do in my brief is I'm going to identify at step 2 those things I consider to be severe. If I see there's an impairment that there's no treatment for it, there's no functional issues there, I will put in the brief, the claimant alleged, hypertension, the claimant alleged, high blood pressure, or it was hypertension, high cholesterol. We would acknowledge these are not severe. And again, my client's got to agree to it, but I would put that in the brief, because I think if you take things off the table, makes the judge's life a little bit easier. So step 1, again, is, are you engaged in SGA level work? Step 2, do you have one or more severe impairments? You want to identify those. Step 3, when I get my brief, is, do you meet a listing? And you heard Bryan talk about, migraine cases sometimes could be listing level, but judges don't go through that analysis. In my experience, it's rare that I get to a case at a hearing where there's a listing level impairment, a listing level of impairment. It can happen, and it does happen 5% of the time. It's very, very rare. So usually I will put at step 3, we do not contend that there is a listing level impairment. If there is one, we'll put the listing, and we would ask the judge to analyze the case using listing 13.06, whatever the listing may be. And I've got a website, by the way, called metalisting.com if you want to look at the listings. But in my experience, most hearing level cases, there is no listing level impairment there. So I usually would put there's no listing level impairment in my brief. Step 4, and again, this is part of the brief, step 4 is, can the claimant return to past relevant work? And, many times at the state agency level, that's the reason why a case was denied. The state agency says this person can go back to their past work. And my argument usually is going to be that the state agency did not consider the combined effect of all the claimant's issues. So I think when you're arguing past relevant work, you want to argue that the combined effect of multiple conditions, the effect of medication side effects, the effect of non-exertional impairments like depression, anxiety, PTSD, when you take all that together, that would reduce that person's residual functional capacity to a point where they could not perform past work. If the past work was semi-skilled or skilled, and you've got significant pain or depression, you can argue that that would eliminate that. And so if you eliminate past relevant work, and so the argument would be there's no past relevant work available, now we're at step 5, which is, are there any jobs a person can do? And that's where, if the person's over 50 or over 55, you can make a grid rule argument. So basically at step 5, is there any work the person can do? I'm going to argue that the combined effect of all these impairments would basically reduce that person's functional capacity to what is called less than sedentary, even a simple entry-level sit-down job. And realize a sedentary job requires somebody to stand and walk up to 2 hours a day, lift 5 pounds frequently, 10 pounds on occasion. So if you can't do that, you can't return to past work. So I'm going to argue the combined effect of everything would put that person at less than sedentary. In the alternative, because the person's over 55 and they're limited to sedentary work, we contend that the grid rule at sedentary applies, as would this POMS regulation, which applies to transferability of skills and basically says that if you're 55 or older limited to sedentary, there would have to be a minimal vocational adjustment to another job. At 55, at 60 rather, even if you could do light work, there is minimal vocational adjustment. So in John's case, he is 62 or is over 60 at onset, and so I would look very closely at look at that POMS regulation, and I'll give you the number here. I'll put this in the notes here so you can look at this yourself. Let me pull it up here. And I use this a lot. I'm just going to stick it here so you can read it. It talks about transferability of skills. So, John, I'm going to put this in the notes here, or the comments there. So if you're over 60, you could look at the grid rules, and I've got a website, gridrules.net. You could look at the grid rules for both sedentary and light and argue that at age 55 or so, age 60, either sedentary or light would disable you, so you can't go back to past relevant work. Bottom line is anybody over 60 has a huge advantage, because Social Security would, if you can get past relevant work, they've got to prove that there is a job out there that would require minimal vocational adjustment. Again, assuming you've got physical limitations, doesn't apply to mental health, but physical limitations, that's really hard to do. So most people at over 60 have a really good shot at winning. You may find it difficult to get an attorney, because if you're already getting retirement, you're only going to get the difference between early retirement and full retirement, which may be $500-600 a month. Many attorneys don't want to mess with it for 25% of 12 months times $500. But I think it's still, you probably have a pretty good argument there. But that is how that's how I look at a brief, and then I'll make that argument using the 5-step sequential evaluation process. So look that up. Look up 5-step sequential evaluation process, and if you can do a brief, you want to follow that reasoning, because that's what judges are going to look at. RIP DT, do AOJs try to protect their denials and remand by not calling for a medical expert? It just depends. Again, I've got one coming up in a couple of weeks where the VE is going to call a medical expert. But, as Bryan said, sometimes the ALJs, they see they got remanded, they want to, they don't want to mess with the district court. They're more likely to want to approve it. On the other hand, I saw a case the other day that wasn't my case, it was somebody else's case, that the ALJ went ahead and denied it again. So, it just really kind of depends. But I think that, ALJs don't like to be remanded. I don't think they take it personal as to you. I mean, you realize you and your attorney's doing his or her job. But, I think, in my opinion, many judges, if they get a remand, they're sort of picking up the vibe that, hey, you probably want to approve this case. Christina says, please like with 5 pink hands. Okay, very nice. And now we got 5 thumbs up. Thank you, Christina. Appreciate it. Charity, of headaches, migraines every day since April 29th through 2006, 46-year-old in therapy. Rep didn't ask the VE questions. I will say this, Charity, usually I'm going to ask the VE some questions. I prepared them ahead of time. If the judge asks the questions I was going to ask, and I'm winning, I've learned a long time ago, if you're winning, keep your mouth shut. So there are times when I don't ask the VE questions because I feel like the judges ask them or I'm winning. If I feel like I need to ask, I will, to make my record. Look, the reality is the judge is going to base his or her decision on a conclusion about your RFC, your functional capacity. And usually it's one of the questions the judge is asking. Rarely will the judge take your attorney's question and make that the basis of his or her decision. It could happen, but it's not likely. So, if the attorney didn't ask a question of the VE, maybe there's a reason why, or maybe the attorney was new, any number of reasons. But, I would certainly ask the attorney, what was the reason for it? And again, it may simply be that all the questions were asked. Christina says, please leave a 5-star review, which I appreciate very much. I'll put on here how to review me, which if you wouldn't mind doing, I would greatly appreciate it. I've gotten some really nice reviews. We've had a kind of a nice run of approvals, so I've gotten some nice reviews, which I really, really appreciate. And anybody who's inclined to do so, if you find this valuable, please do it. Appreciate it. Lady JJ Self-Care. I've had my hearing in September, the second hearing, hoping to get approved, but I worry because of my age, 49, dealing with health issues. What are chances of winning? Again, without knowing about your medical, I don't know. I mean, I think 49 is not as good as 51, not as good as 57, but better than 35. So you're getting close. You heard Bryan talk about, using the sort of, you're close to it and using the rules, the grid rules at 50. If you're close to 50, being in that sort of area, you still have to prove, assuming judge doesn't do that, you have to prove that there's no work you can do. The risk is that the judge approves you as of your 50th birthday, which would eliminate past due benefits. So, it's just going to depend on, what the evidence shows. But again, generally speaking, at 49, you have to prove there's no work at all you could do. Nothing in the economy. The easiest warm body job that exists, you can't do it. That is literally what you have to prove at that age. Jackie, how are you doing, Jackie? I'm glad to see you here. Julia, I have 45 years as a legal nurse. Why was I just invited to testify by ALJ? Why was I not invited? Julia, I don't know if I understand your question. You have 45 years as a legal nurse. Why was I assume not invited to testify by the ALJ? Are you talking about as an expert witness? Are you talking about at your own hearing? Give me more detail because I don't understand your question. Sandra, does it take years to get a hearing when appealing? It's been 7 years and repeated requests for hearing. Okay, if you've filed multiple requests for hearing and no response, that says to me something is lost. I would contact your U.S. representative, your senator, find out what's going on. Something is, if you've filed a bunch of requests for hearing, you're not getting anything back, something is not right. It shouldn't take that long. I mean, again, I'm trying cases that I filed 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago. 7 years says that your file got lost. And unfortunately, what you may find is that you got denied at some point. They never told you, you never got the letter, and you keep filing stuff, and they're like, it's a dead file, and they're just throwing it away. So you got to find that out. Okay. Julia says, I have 45 years as a legal nurse. Why was I not invited to my nephew's SSDI hearing? Well, again, if your nephew had an attorney, the attorney could bring you in as a witness. But again, you would have to be talking about what you personally have observed. They don't really, as far as a legal nurse, I don't know that judges are going to ask you to testify about and analyzing the medical record. I guess theoretically you could ask the judge, if as the attorney could ask the judge, we have a person here, an expert in legal, medical record review. We would like this person to testify. The judge can say yes or no. But usually that's got to be prompted by the attorney asking for that. The judge is not going to call you out of the blue without an attorney saying, can we have Julia come and testify in our hearing? All right. Audrey Tuvia Chartel, the whole mess is actually in my case. For the worst part, decided to file for disability. I think that, look, big picture, anybody who files for disability, it is a really, really, really difficult thing to do. You're labeling yourself as disabled. That is a very hard road, very hard label to put on yourself. And, I don't know that Social Security judges realize how difficult it can be to put that label on yourself. And I think that there's a lot of situational depression that goes along with deciding you're disabled. Look, you go from working, interacting with coworkers, supervisors, the public, making money, feeling productive, to sitting at home looking at the four walls. How can that not be depressing? I don't think that gets enough consideration by disability adjudicators or judges, but it's very, very real. And I've had people tell me at my hearing today, my client talked about, he had been in a people first type of job. He's like, it's just miserable. I'm sitting at home, I talk to my wife. He lives in kind of a rural area. He says, it's miserable. There's, all I do is sit around and think about how uncomfortable I am. What kind of life is that? Okay. Eddie Rubio, how her processing time is being affected by the massive job cuts, waiting 4 years for decision in London, filed through the embassy. Well, again, I think that 4 years, red flag, it's taken way too long. Contact your congressperson. But I think that generally speaking, the wait times have gone up. I would say, certainly by 15 to 20%. It's not uncommon for initial applications to take a year, 10 months, a year, reconsideration, 8, 10, 12 months. A hearing is going to be 5 or 6 months. I would say, assuming you don't get approved early, assume 2.5 years. Assume 2.5 years. Maybe you get lucky and you get a hearing within a couple of years, but assume 2.5 years. That's a long time to wait. It's a hell of a long time to wait. Okay, 5 steps of the review process. All right, so Ty's matrix is talking about something very different than when I was talking about the 5-step sequential. So when you go to your MySSA page, they will say there's these different steps. This is not the 5-step sequential evaluation process. This is sort of the review of your claim. And I've talked about this many times before. This doesn't mean anything. Step 1 means they've received, like you said, they've received your application. Step 2, let's see what step 2, we've done a non-medical review to see whether or not you're still working. That's what that would be. Step 3, we're starting to requesting medical records. Step 4 is, they've done the review and they're going to have it reviewed by a medical expert. Step 5 is we'll send you a notice. That is not the same thing as the 5-step sequential evaluation process. This is simply a way for them to tell you where you're at in the review process. The problem is there's no standard for how long things take. You could be at step 3, that they're requesting medical records. That could be 1.5 years. Step 4, they're having somebody look at it. That could be a year. So it doesn't really, it's just a way for them to tell you they're processing your case. But it could be at step 2 or step 3 for a long time. I think it is, they give you these steps as a way to pacify you so that you think something's being done, when in fact it could sit there for months with nothing being done. But do not confuse what you see in your My Social Security page with the 5-step sequential evaluation process. What are vocational witnesses going to do when the AI eliminates their jobs? I think AI is a tool. I think that the vocational witnesses, when they testify, they talk about their own experience in placing people with disabilities, in reviewing what employers will tolerate. So I don't know that AI is going to replace it. I think it becomes a tool where the judge plugs it into the AI and they ask the vocational witness to confirm that this is an accurate representation of the job market. So I don't think it's going to eliminate them, but I think it's going to be used more and more by ALJs, by Social Security, to get the cases processed. Logically, it would be to get the cases processed faster. The problem is they don't want to process them faster because they don't want to pay people. They want to delay it as long as possible. So I think the AI will be used to make decisions, but I don't think it's going to be moving things along because I don't think they want to. Cindy, thank you. You're welcome. Ty's Matrix, thank you very much. I appreciate that very much. Deadlines and support to get filing paperwork out has been an awful experience and making me feel agoraphobic, and I do therapy. All these forms they give you, and let me talk about that a little bit, because I know one of the other appeals lawyers that I have become friendly with, Adriana De La Torre, who's been on here a couple of times, and she has a really interesting LinkedIn page. If you're on LinkedIn, you should follow her, and she will post cases. And she actually did a post of a case the last couple of days where she talked about the importance of the forms. And the point of this particular case she cited was that in the forms, the person talked about that they could do vacuuming, they could clean their house, they could do laundry. At the hearing, it became a lot less that they could do. And the judge said, well, I've got two different conflicting reports about what this person can do. And I'm going to take the position that what they said in the forms is more representative of what they can do than what they said at the hearing. Her point was that when you fill out these forms, everything you say is really important. So if, they ask, what you do, and you want to put in there and you are literally, I can stand for 10 minutes, you got to put that in there. I look at all these forms and people, I can't stand very long, or I can't sit very long, or they talk about things they can do, or their third party statements talk about things they can do, really without thinking about, can they really do this? Not one day if your life depended on it. I'm talking about month after month, week after week. Could you do this? And I think when you fill out the forms, you have to think of it in those terms, not if your life depended on it, how you're feeling good today, but if you had to do this task, sit, stand, lift, kneel, crouch, crawl, whatever it may be, month after month after month, could you do it on a regular basis? But I think that what you put in the forms, should be consistent with what you testified to. And again, a lot of times when you fill these forms out, you're not represented. You're kind of filling them out to get them out of the way, but you really got to pay some attention to them. And I've been looking more at the forms now. When I do my brief, I will talk about what I think my client will testify about, but I'll also point out that in the adult function report at page, 12E, page 4, the claimant talked about, inability to stand more than 10 minutes, inability to sit more than 5 minutes, having to take unscheduled breaks to go to the bathroom. I'll use those statements in my brief. Then I will say the claimant will testify about this as well. But, he already put it in there. He already talked about this. And, he did this really, I'm not saying it this way, but before really understanding the implications of that, this is truthful. And what he's saying now, what he said then is the same. So, yeah, I think that you want to pay attention to those forms. Sam the man. I'm 61 with a herniated disc on the neck and lower back. Hearing is less than 2 weeks away. Have you not spoken to the attorney from Gen X? If you know anything about this company, Gen X, they are non-attorney reps. And what they do is they will contract many times with long-term disability carriers, I believe, or they may have their own deal where they do disability cases. What they usually do, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't want to speak to Gen X because I don't, I've dealt with them very peripherally. Many times the non-attorney rep firms will hire a contract attorney to do the hearing. I don't know that they have their own attorneys. I think they contract with attorneys. I've done contract work for Brown and Brown absence services for a couple of these other companies. I don't do it anymore. I'm really too busy for it, but I did for a while. And some of them were really good about giving me a really complete file. And I would try to call my client, the client a couple of weeks ahead of time, and they would pay me, just so they would pay me $500 or $600 to do the hearing. And I would prepare the case. I'm getting paid $500 or $600, so I can put in a couple of hours in preparation time plus the hearing. Again, it was never a problem because A, they prepared the cases, the ones I dealt with prepared the cases well, and B, I have an ethical obligation. I mean, the bar doesn't care. Oh, I'm only getting paid $500. I got to do the job right. So I would say that you might want to reach out to Gen X or whoever the non-attorney rep firm is and say, who is the attorney who's going to be representing me? When can I expect to hear from him or her? And try to get something scheduled, 10 days out, within 2 weeks. It's time to talk to the attorney. And again, if Gen X does a good job doing the hearing prep, which is again what a lot of these firms will do, they have paralegal type folks that will do the hearing prep, then you should have an attorney at that point able to look at it intelligently and talk to you intelligently. So again, my experience with Gen X is I've had cases where people will use them. They'll contact me and say, "Will you take the case over?" I'm not comfortable with. I'm not talking about Gen X in particular, but with the non-attorney rep. And some of these firms do a really good job. Some of them don't. But and I'm not speaking about Gen X pro or con. I don't have any opinion about them. But that's been my experience as to how firms like that work. And I would definitely reach out and say, I need to talk to somebody because it's time. Charity. Okay, so tried to hire somebody. The pharmacy department, dealing with a firm with two different cases. Again, it's kind of hard to switch attorneys in midstream. You may have two attorneys. I think if the case gets remanded back from federal court, then one attorney can probably do it, the trial attorney. I would probably talk to both parties, both the appeals attorney as well as the hearing attorney, and see if you can kind of come to an agreement as to who's going to be handling the case if an appeal is filed, just because you got to get that worked out. Chantet says, thank you. You're welcome, Chantet. Saint PR, hello, Iowa. Okay, I'm sure there'll be more there. St. Louis Grand, he has the man himself here today. Talking about Bryan, yes, I do. I did. And again, Bryan, he was up, like he told me, like at 4:30, 3:30 in the morning, I guess working on some cases. He's a badass. He's working early. So he's like, you know what? We started at 8:30 because I'm going to be, getting pretty tired. He goes, I'll do an hour and then I can come back another time. So absolutely. And I'm glad he was able to come. In fact, like I said, I had a case that I had referred to him to look at, and he emailed me earlier today and says, yeah, we're gonna go for it. So I just emailed my client and said, hey, be ready. I was denied last year an appeal, so now I can reapply with a new claim. Okay, so yeah, if you appeal and your deadline for filing a second appeal is over, you can reapply, but realize the onset date for your new claim is going to be the day after the unfavorable hearing decision. So if you got denied on June 25th, 2024, and you appealed it and didn't go anywhere, June 26th of 2024 is your new onset date. They're not, anything before that is considered a thing decided. Res judicata is the Latin term for it. And you need to make sure you still have insurance coverage as of your new date last insured. You don't get another bite at the apple, is my point. You can't go back to 22 or 23. That's already been decided. Well said, says Cindy. I don't know what I said well, but I'm glad. I'm glad you found it useful. Okay. What if a doctor's notes were inaccurate and the DDS ALJ based on a knowledge some part of these inaccurate records were actually corrected? Doctor agreed the records were wrong. I think that could be grounds for appeal. I think that correcting those records would be something that I would submit, and again, I would defer to somebody like Bryan to talk about where that would come from. But, whether you could submit those records at the federal court level, they're not usually going to look at new evidence, but I think something like that where, you have evidence that the records that were relied upon are incorrect, I think that is very, very relevant. Absolutely. KU Thunder. I enjoy when you have experts share. Absolutely. And my pleasure. And yeah, I learn a lot. Look, when I talk to people like Bryan or Adriana, or I know I had Lindsay Osterhout on, I'm going to get some other people on. I got a judge who said he'd come on. I just got to pin him down to a date, former retired judge. I think it's helpful because, I don't know everything, and different perspectives are definitely very useful. So I think that I enjoy having these guests on. It just makes it more interesting, I think, just having a couple of different people chatting about things as opposed to just me blabbing. So Elliot says, contacting the congressperson helps you. Absolutely. I completely agree with that. On the issue here is the survival, lack of available support. I mean, in order to get some help, I need disability or sugar daddy. I will leave the sugar daddy part. I'm not going to touch that. That's beyond the scope of what I do. But yeah, I mean, I think people do suffer because it takes a long time. I think it's, judges don't, I think they know at some level, but I don't think they realize how difficult it can be to survive for 2 or 3 years with literally no money coming in. I've had, this by the way is Costco sparkling water, so I'm not drinking vodka. Costco sparkling water, which is actually kind of good. A lot of times I'll get the Perrier or I'll get, San Pellegrino, but the Costco, which is cheaper, is actually pretty good. Anyway, but I think it's really, really hard to survive. I think judges don't necessarily realize that. And again, when you have to go back to work so you can eat and they use it against you, that's really, really unfair. It's just an unfair overall system. But it's really, really tough. Corlil Katana, who was very nice to leave me a tip of $10. I appreciate it. How long does it take for SSA to send a decision letter after the case is decided? It can be as little as, I had one come out in a week. I got a favorable in a week. It can take 2-3 months. I'd say on average, it's going to be 4 to 5 weeks has been my experience. 4 to 5 weeks. It just depends on how backlogged they are. But I'm telling people 2 to 6 weeks is kind of what I'm telling my clients, and usually it's faster than that. What if the doctor says you're not a good candidate for surgery? Is that helpful? It depends. Why are you not a good candidate? Because your condition is not one that is going to be helped by surgery. You're a candidate for long-term pain management, or your condition is so mild that surgery is not really warranted. Like, for example, I've had people that have very mild, arthritis in their knee. They're not a candidate for knee replacement. They maybe can get some euflexor shots in the knee, something like that, but it's really not a surgical candidate. But there are some minimally invasive procedures that might give them some relief. By contrast, I have people that have multi-level disc herniations with spinal stenosis and nerve impingement, and the doctors are saying you're not a great candidate for surgery because the odds of a surgery successfully addressing this problem are pretty low, so you're not a candidate. So it depends on which one of those you are. Obviously, if it's because you're just so far gone, it's not going to help you, that's going to make your case stronger. But I think if it's too mild, that's probably not going to help you very much. Thank you, Christina. I really appreciate that. I get a lot out of these. You guys ask great questions to me. It makes me think about stuff, and I love the interaction because in my practice, I'm talking to my clients, but I'm also I spend a lot. Honestly, I spend a lot of my day doing pre-hearing work. I'm working on pre-hearing briefs. I'm working on coming up with video topics. I'm answering questions from my staff. I don't talk to a lot of people because I'm just so busy just dealing with all the stuff. I got my firm to operate. I got these things I got to pay bills and things like that. So this is a great forum for me because people can ask questions kind of free form and I can just answer them. I've done this for a long time, so I can kind of answer them just sort of one after the other. And it's really kind of cool. I really like it. I know Walter, he has a thing where he has a phone where people can call the phone. I've watched some of those. I'm not convinced that's the best way to do it because I find sometimes when people call on the phone, they tend to kind of go on about, a lot of detail and really some stuff they probably shouldn't be talking about in public. I'm not saying I won't try that, but I think using the chat is probably not a bad way to do it. But what I have thought about is there's a utility I've used where people can record questions. And I really haven't used it very much lately, but I may stick that out there where somebody could record a question. I can play the recording of their question and answer the question. That might give it a little different approach. So maybe I'll look into doing that. Let's see. Nobody has any financial statement. My claims have been able to look at my federal claim just got done being tested for ASD. We have to give you 50. Well, again, attorneys are only going to get paid what they're going to get paid. I would say this: if you want to reach out to Bryan or reach out to me with your information, I'm sure he would take a look at it. If you've already got somebody retained that is, preparing a federal court appeal, it's kind of hard to sort of change horses in midstream. Depends on where your case is at. I'm certainly happy to pass along your information to Bryan, and you can communicate with him directly. Like I said, just look at his federal appeals firm is his firm. But I can't speak for him, but I know if somebody's already got an attorney involved in it, and realize an attorney, whether or not he's getting paid, he or she's getting paid, has an ethical obligation to give you 100%. So I wouldn't be so focused on the fact that there's no financial stake. The real question is if you have an attorney who's doing this at no cost, it may be that that attorney is really, really busy, maybe doesn't have the time to give to your case. So again, if you want to talk to Bryan, reach out to him directly and see what he says. But, I know sometimes people are reluctant to get involved when there's another attorney already involved. Okay, so Audrey special needs child, absentee father, enrolled to work for years. And again, that says to me, you may not have enough insurance coverage for Title II disability. They put you in SSI world. That's a problem because, SSI, there's a lot of offsets. It's just really a much more difficult road to go. So I think one thing you might want to do is get your My Social Security Statement, ssa.gov/my account, and see if you have enough credits for disability. Sandra requested a hearing in 2019. Every year except for 20s, reminders still want a hearing. Hearing was okay. Yeah, something's not right, Sandra. Something is not right at all. Contact your U.S. Senator. I'm telling you, something's not right. I guess I agree. Brian's great. And again, he has a lot of knowledge. You can see he shares a lot of what he knows, helps people like me, my hearing practice, do a better job. But yeah, he's great. He's really good. And again, a lot of good attorneys who are willing to share what they know. Audrey, I'm sure they don't they consider the duress outside the system. No, they don't consider that. The only thing they're looking at is whether the medical supports your claim for disability. They don't really care about the rest of it. They just don't care. Oh my goodness. Yeah, he's very good. He's very good. Christina, you're absolutely right on that. Hey, Vince, how are you doing? How are you doing? I'm glad you were doing well. Okay, Christina says, don't forget to subscribe. We got about 10 minutes to go, so let's kind of run through some of these. Beginning overpayments for request for reconsideration, but 7 years, ignore appeals, still take. Again, Sandra, something's not right. You got to do some more investigation. You're just sitting there waiting for something to happen. It's not going to happen. You got to find out what's really going on. Okay. Please smash. I like it. Smash that like button. And my late mom used to say, mash that button. We got an elevator. Mash that button. I've never heard anybody else say that. Mash that button. She was born in Atlanta. And it's funny because I was growing up and I don't have I have a little bit of an accent, but I don't have much of a traditional Southern accent. If you heard me, you wouldn't necessarily think I'm from Atlanta, the South. And Atlanta is a Southern city, but it's very cosmopolitan. My mom was born in 1919. And so she grew up and her parents were not born in this country, but she was. And she had a very thick accent, but growing up, I didn't know, it's the way she sounded. So I didn't really think about it. My wife, who's from New York, first time she met my mom, she got, what an incredibly thick accent she's got. Like, what are you talking about? She doesn't have an accent. So, you don't always hear it, but smash the button. She used to say, mash that button. So sometimes my wife and I will be in an elevator. This is a joke. You mash that button. So anyway, Trish Wade says, hello, everybody. Hello, Trish. Charity, last representative, not attorney, could make legal advice. Yeah, again, you have the non-attorney reps, and I'm not going to get into that because I think there's some non-attorney reps who do a really good job and some that don't. There's some good attorneys and some not so good attorneys. That's a decision people have to make about what they want. 117 watching. Yes. Okay. That's right. I have 113 now. I want to try to get it to 200. I need to work on that. St. Louis Ground. My experience reading is AI. If you make your request, ask for specific references, generally accurate. Nothing saying one can ask AI to double check its work. Yeah, true. I think that, you can even ask an AI to show you its thinking on Gemini. The thing about AI, which concerns me, and I'm actually in an AI mastermind group that I joined about 3 weeks ago with an attorney out of New Orleans, who's I've sort of known about, kind of run in sort of similar circles for a number of years. I went to school in New Orleans, so I've kind of known of him for many, many years. And it's interesting in this mastermind group, we talk about AI. And of course, the real question that comes up is, if I'm putting something in AI, I got to make sure it's private. I don't want this out on the internet. And so the AI engines that I've dealt with have privacy modes. The paid programs you can set up where there's no sharing of information, to the extent that's possible. Look, if an agent from North Korea wanted to break into my Gmail account or my AI account, I'm sure they're going to do it. But I think if you take reasonable precautions, it's okay. The big issue with AI that we talked about in our mastermind from yesterday, we're talking about it was, you got to just make sure it's accurate. Like I said, I was working in a brief today, and it gave me a citation. I checked it, wasn't right. So I manually fixed it. I also didn't like the way the AI started the brief. Just kind of, so I wrote half of it, a form, it's sort of a standard form. I used the AI for some of it. And I did, so it's a tool. It's a tool. It's never going to replace what I do totally, but the best way I could put it from my perspective is I'm not starting with a blank piece of paper. I had a law professor when I was back in the dark ages when I went to Tulane Law School many, many years ago. And my library research professor said to my class, he said, look, when you hit 30 years old, and I'm just over 30 right now, you should never be looking at a blank piece of paper. And his point was that as you get more experienced, there are certain levels of work that somebody else should be doing in a law firm that you take it at a certain level and you run from there. And I think what AI has done is instead of having, like, a small firm is not going to have an associate that's a first or second year associate do it, AI is now that associate. So just like my wife worked in a big firm, when she was 6, 7, 8 years into it, the newer people would do the initial prep work for a deposition or a brief or something like that, and she would come in and fix it. You never take what a new person, a newbie, would be doing and just file it or submit it. You have to double check it. And I think AI is sort of taking that role, and that's the way I see it. It's sort of like a new associate who's bright but doesn't know what they don't know, is maybe a good way to put it. Okay, A is flawed, so being part. Yeah, I think you got to be very precautionary. I don't think there's any way that you should ever assume that AI is solving every single problem. It does some really great things, and I think it's going to get better. Okay, I experienced a meta messenger bot who led me on a whole day trying to sell and turning down bids from an antique paper collection. Told me I sold it. Okay, yeah, again, there's going to be spam, AI stuff as well. You can ask it to kind of study or prepare that. Look, I'll tell you, here's something I would tell you as a claimant. If you're going through the disability process, go to ChatGPT, go to Claude, go to any of these AI engines and say, what are the questions I'm likely to get at my Social Security disability hearing? And is it going to be perfect? No, but it's going to give you some things to think about. It will help you prepare. What are questions I should ask my attorney to help me best prepare for my disability hearing? That may help you be a better client and better prepared. These are the sort of things where I think you can use AI. But again, I wouldn't assume it's going to give an answer to, am I going to win my disability case? No. Okay, Michael, enjoying the program, looking to be approved. Assessed to one of my cases, not a determination. Good. I hope you are approved. The federal lawyers get a fee from the government if they win a remand. Yes. The government will pay. There's EJA fees, and then there's the 406B fees. So there are different types of fees. I know Bryan talked about that a little bit. I think you're talking about St. Louis. You're talking about the EJA fees, equal access to justice fees. Case evaluation here. Okay, I'm going to take a couple more questions. Heisenberg, the whole system's a scam. Special mental health insurance, pharma paid by off, push poison, Mr. Yeah, I'm not sure if I would go that far. I think that, is money a factor in healthcare? Absolutely. Does money dictate decisions that doctors make? Yeah. The pharmaceutical companies push medicines. We saw that with, the Sacklers and OxyContin. Is the whole system flawed? No. But, money, you got to look. I will tell you, in my opinion, my wife is a big advocate for this. You have to be an advocate. The word. You have to be an advocate. Okay. When you're in the healthcare system, you have to ask questions. You can't assume that somebody's going to find something out and tell you. You have to be your own advocate, and you know your body best. So, you don't take anything at face value. Get copies of your records, read them critically. Again, use AI to interpret these things. That can help you. But everything you do, take it with a grain of salt, because you're ultimately, your brain is the best AI. Your brain's the best AI. Okay. I've had 2 attorneys drop me. And again, the question is why? The question is why? No Sky says, hello. How are you doing? Need an appeals counsel lawyer? And again, not every attorney does that. Thank you for the live stream. You're welcome. Thanks for our time. You're welcome. Thank you, Brian. So much, Attorney Brian. Yes, Brian's great. Christina says, thank you. You're okay. I can bask in the glory here. Thank you. Everybody's saying thank you. Okay, we're going to take a couple more questions. Is it a good sign if the examiner, stage 3, they'll request medical records after my next neurosurgeon orthopedic? It's always good when they're requesting records. You want to update the file. You've had 8 knee surgeries, including 4 revisions in the last 4 years, plus a fusion. Yeah, you're 45. That's the big. If you're 55, if you're 55 in October, you got a grid rule case. I mean, I think you got a strong case there. Okay. Had my ALJ hearing, turned 55. The judge knew to use the grid rules. I think that they know. I mentioned it in my briefs because I want to put it in the record, but I think they all know. Hit the like button. Yes. Okay. What do third hearings look like? Same judge. Case. Again, it's good to get a new ALJ. The ALJ is going to do it the same way the other ones would do it. As Brian said, I think that, ALJs see remands. It probably gives them a little bit of a hint that they should probably be approving. Okay. All right. Let me take 2 more and then I will go because it's 2 hours and 6 minutes and I obviously need my beauty sleep here. Jay Sellers, breast cancer, arthritis, other pains, 14 meds, mental health therapy, age 53, asked for Congressman Still, Texas, reconsideration. Yeah, again, 53 is good. I mean, I think that, anybody over 50 has a little bit of advantage. It'd be better if you were 56, but 53 is still good. You may have a grid rule argument if you can be limited to sedentary work. I think the medication side effects are really important. You're still in treatment for cancer. I think my sense is you probably got a pretty good argument here. That's my gut sense. Cajun Sunshine, we have received the work function report request, other forms to fill out. Does this mean my trial hearing may be coming up? Thanks, Mr. Jen, for the assistance. You probably got my videos. One of my clients, obviously. We've received a work function report. Yeah, that's probably, I have to look to see where you're at, but yeah, that usually means things are moving forward. We'll leave it at that. Yes, I think so. I think that's a good thing. Okay. Ticket to work, TCAS, I don't deal with it enough to be able to talk about it intelligently. I don't know. Okay. This will be my last question. Glamour Girl. What do you mean when you said new DLI with a new filing? Wouldn't it be the same as the first claim if you've not worked? Yes, your DLI would be the same. My point was if you file a new claim, your district court, and you file a new claim, or you start a new claim after it being denied, the earliest onset date you can have is the day after your unfavorable hearing decision. But the question is your DLI in the future? Let's say that you got an unfavorable decision on June 25th, 2025, but your DLI was, March 31 of 2025. If you start a new case, you can't go back to March. You got to start with June 26, 2025. Your DLI is in the past. Therefore, you're not going to be in this SSDI world anymore. You're SSI land only. So my point is simply you need to know your DLI. Look at your date last insured. Look at your hearing decision and make sure that if you're going to file a new case, because you're not going to appeal the existing one, that your DLI is well in the future. And I will tell you, and again, this is just my practice, if somebody gets denied and they call me and say, I want to refile right away, my question is, what's changed? Because if, let's say you got denied on June 25th, 2025, and you file a new case with the onset date of June 26th, the same judge will be assigned to it. What changed? What is different? So my opinion, if you're going to file a new case, I tell people generally, assuming you can do it, DOI is not a problem. Wait a year, wait 6 months so that you can say something has changed. You're just filing a new case with everything the same, you're going to get the same result. So that's just my take on it. Okay, we are now at 2 hours and 10 minutes, so I'm going to sign off for now. I appreciate everybody coming in and joining us. Thanks again to Bryan Konoski for his time and expertise, and we'll get some different guests coming in the future. I appreciate all of you. I hope you all have a very, very healthy and happy 4th of July. I guess that should be, well, we're going to be here. Let's see. I don't even remember. Let's see. The next week is going to be the 2nd of July. Okay. So it's a little bit early to wish you a nice 4th, but if you are on vacation, if you're not going to be here next week because you're doing something for the 4th, have a great 4th. Otherwise, I'll see you back here next week at 8:30 on Wednesday, and have a great weekend. Stay cool because it is hot here in Atlanta. I played tennis today. It was like 96 degrees. So I got all the toxins out, which is kind of nice, but got to be careful at that level of heat. So if it's like that, I know Jen was telling me in Nebraska, it was like 97, 98. So it's hot. There's a heat wave going on. So everybody be safe out there. We'll see you next week.